With me today is Jay Chauhan of Berkshire Corporate, and we'll be speaking about an exchange we delayed completion deal he completed a few years ago even. So welcome, Jay.
Hey, thanks, Derek. Thanks for me.
Great. Jay, tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you sort of got into developments.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks for the intro, Tarek. So I started in property probably over 10 years now, whilst I was working corporate. So I was working in the city, did a variety of roles from business development to project management. But whilst I was within the city, I always had an urge to get out of the city. Pretty much as soon as I got in, I wanted to leave. The corporate life wasn't for me. I just knew it from the day I actually started. So I started investing actually in South Wales. So a bit of a journey from London, but I had fortunate enough to have a good team down there, who had a project manager, a refurb team, and it was just buying sort of small deals that if they were to go wrong, I felt comfortable with sort of the money that I might have ended up losing. So these were small sort of 2 to 3 beds that added value to from a refurb and then just flipped them on the open market. So did a few of them whilst I was working in the city, and then decided that I wanted to bring it closer to home where I'd have some sort of opportunity or chance that there would be capital growth. In Wales, as nice as an area is, lucky to see sort of a 1-2% increase over 5 years, whereas where I operate now, which is sort of the Berkshire area up to West London, there's some significant capital growth that I've achieved from a small portfolio of buy-to-lets and HMOs that I decided to build after South Wales. That actually allowed me to then come out of working in the city, focusing full-time on property, which is what I do now, and formed Berkshire Corporate a couple of years back, which predominantly does sort of developments.
Right. Okay. And so is that your mainstay now? I think you still have your portfolio, which comprises single buy-to-lets and HMOs. And what's the kind of the broad mix at the moment? Like in an average week, are you spending more time on development, spending more time on portfolio building?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think this last year that just gone, obviously we talked about it slightly off camera, I've focused in mainly on sort of the portfolio side of things, as well as we have got a small sort of management agency, so they take care of all the stock. We're also working with the housing provider, helping them procure housing essentially, and that's taken up a lot of time. Still sort of doing some developments, probably not as much as I'd like to, but I think moving forward this year, I'm looking at forming a couple of partnerships that will enable us to do a lot more sites, a couple of which that we've already got in the pipeline moving into 2022.
Right. Okay. So that's interesting. So this housing association that you're working with, they're kind of providing an exit for either single buy-to-let stock or HMO. So if you've got if you're a landlord, you could you work with landlords who to help them get the housing association to effectively take over the stock from the landlords, and on a 3 to 5 year type tenancy or lease.
Typically that's what they're keen on, is sort of up to 5 years sort of lease. Yeah.
Right. That's interesting, and that's around where you're kind of operating, which is along the M4 corridor, is it? Yeah,
correct. Yeah, that's
cool. Cool. Okay, that's certainly useful to know. Now, walk me through this exchange with delayed completion deal. It's in Vantage Road in Reading. First of all, describe the property.
We'll see. I'll keep it as nice as I can, but yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's a mixed use. It was mixed use commercial building. So you had a post office. So it was an owner occupier who I think had it for over 35 years, operating it as a post office with residential accommodation on the uppers. Really, really poor condition, this property internally. You could tell it had absolutely nothing spent on it, and they were just looking to relocate up to sort of northwest London. to be closer to family. I think the sort of business was on its last legs as well, so they wanted to look at exiting to sell and move sort of up to London.
And I think they were living in the upper parts, were they, in the flat?
Correct. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it was owner occupied, so literally, nice short commute to work. But yeah, they were living upstairs, whilst obviously operating the business each day downstairs.
Yeah, so it's quite a traditional owner-operator business in that way, isn't it? Where they have the store downstairs and then they live upstairs. It's kind of a classic kind of setting. But what is interesting about this property is that it's kind of out of sorts in a way, because it almost kind of doesn't belong in the neighborhood, as a mixed use. The surrounding areas are all residential properties, and this kind of was, not say a sore thumb, but it certainly didn't keep in line with the rest of the street.
No, exactly. I mean, we come on to it, but it ticked all the boxes for, like you said, not really sitting in line with the rest of the sort of residential street. It was, a commercial building that did kind of stick out, but that did then, that allowed us to see the opportunity in what was possible with it, i.e. using permitted development rights to do what we did with the property, to effectively change it completely back to residential.
And how did you find this site? Was it through an agent? Was it direct to vendor?
Yeah, so it was direct to vendor. It was previously listed online. They were getting no traction with suitable buyers, whether that's because no one saw what opportunity it was, or I think the agent was a commercial agent who was trying to market it for purposes of someone taking over the business, so like an ongoing concern, which I just didn't think it had much attraction or interest on that basis. But we approached the landowner directly, or the vendor directly, and had a conversation with them pretty much as soon as they received our letter. They were in touch, and we started sort of speaking to them from there.
So it was on with the commercial agent, and then it had effectively come off the market, so to speak.
Yeah.
Then you wrote to the wrote to the owners. I mean, they lived. I mean, there wasn't any certainty, but had you been to see the property before, or before you wrote to them? No, it was just a download of the title register.
Yeah, so this was initially found when. Yeah, so we obviously use Google Street View as well as software such as Nimbus, actually, to sort of trawl local areas. Obviously, I know the area quite well. I didn't know this property specifically, but it stood out, as you sort of mentioned before to us. Hang on a minute, it's a nice residential area with a commercial shop. So it just intrigued us to look that little bit further, and thought it's worth sending a letter for the sake of a letter. Let's get it out and see if we get a response.
Yeah, I mean, for the cost of a first class stamp and a bit of effort in writing a letter. And did you get a response straight away, or did it take a while?
Literally, I can't recall what day it was that the letter was sent, but working out the fact that it was sent first class, I think they would have called us the day they received the letter.
All right. Okay. Wow. Okay. Yeah. And then obviously they were keen to sell. So actually, just before I come on to the next question, so there's an interesting insight there, because potentially you could also be looking at commercial listings or commercial agents where they are listing properties for sale as an existing business, and find potential opportunities there. So it could be a PD play, a permitted development play, but you look at existing owner-occupier type business who are selling with the freehold interest, for example, or it could be a long leasehold interest, and then potentially acquiring that log, stone, and barrel, but really only with a view to not running the business, but actually just converting it into a residential unit as a potential development play in effect. So that could be another avenue.
I think there's definitely going to be opportunity with that moving forward, especially with what's happened last 2 years with sort of the new permitted development rules or permissions that are allowed, I think there's an opportunity there, especially where you have, like you said, have potentially a commercial building being marketed, looking at selling it with as an ongoing concern for the business. Even if you were to take a property on that has got a tenant in, obviously subject to looking at the lease, and obviously that's where you can get someone like yourself on to really look at that and see if there is an opportunity to obtain rental income from day one, get your permissions in place, and look to exit that lease, and then be able to bring you on to developing that unit to residential. I think there's a great opportunity there moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I think you mentioned Nimbus Maps. That I was on a webinar with Nimbus Maps a couple of weeks ago, and they've got this feature. I'm not sure whether it's new, but certainly this feature, which I thought is very, very good, very, very helpful, is you could choose a particular area and then apply a layer, and it identifies with all the potential permitted development opportunities within that specific area, and it just applies it as a layer. And you can then select it, and it'll give you potential sizes and per square footage and all the other stuff that Nimbus Maps does. But I thought that was quite interesting because you could just in one click in a particular area just identify all the PD plays, and then you just do a direct vendor letter and go. You went with a exchange with delayed completion approach. I'll come on to why, but how did you start off the negotiations with the vendor? Obviously they were keen, they got in touch with you, and what happened next? Did you go to see the site?
Yeah, so we see the phone call was along the lines of, we received your letter, we were intrigued, wanted to find out a bit more. Straight away, I always try and look to meet them, find out a bit more. Obviously they can show me around the property themselves, it's owner occupied, but then also just sit down with them and just find out a bit more about their situation. And the best way, in my opinion, to do that is to sit down with them and go through that. So that's what we did. I think I set up a meeting with them a couple of days later, went round, had a look at the property, sat down with them to find out what it is they're trying to achieve, what their circumstances are, where they're looking to go. And that's when I found out about the plans to relocate to be, I think, close to their daughter who's about to have a baby. So wanted to be there for effectively their grandchildren, and they just had enough of running the shop. The shop was, when I walked in there, I remember seeing that the shop, it had, stock items were next to nothing. Like I said, the building was in disrepair and it's poorly looked after, so you could see it was sort of on its last legs. So yeah, it's literally meeting them to build that sort of rapport and find out a bit more about their circumstance.
So am I right in thinking that they weren't quite the distressed seller, but certainly they were a motivated seller?
Yeah, I would say that's spot on, Tarek. Yeah, they were definitely keen to sell, keen to be able to move, to allow them to move to London, but they weren't desperate. It was owner occupied. They had no lending on the property either, so they've obviously got themselves in a position that they had no sort of debt against the asset, and they were just looking for an exit.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. So they didn't have the lender on the property, which I'll come on to in a minute again. But also there wasn't this ticking time bomb for one of a better term, in terms of the pressure on them to sell quickly and pay off the mortgage. So moving then, what made you think about an exchange or delayed completion deal here rather than an unconditional deal or even an option agreement?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I was toying with the idea of an option. The reason I went with an exchange delay completion was twofold. From the perspective of the sellers, they wanted some certainty. Me providing them with an exchange, they said that would give them what they wanted, which that certainty. From my angle, the rationale behind going for it was to, whilst I was confident getting the permitted development, I just wanted to ensure that was the case. So we decided to look at getting all the permissions in place before then also having that opportunity as a window then to also start the work. So we did agree sort of a 12-month sort of gap there. So that we felt that was enough time to get permissions as well as then start some of the works. We were pushing to actually finish it. It wasn't too far off, but it did take a little bit longer. So that was the reasoning from our perspective and also the vendor's perspective to give them that certainty.
So the vendor security you were going to complete on the deal rather than just have an option, so that wouldn't have worked out for them, not having you on the hook, so to speak, right? Because with the option agreement, you have the right to purchase a property, but you're not obliged to purchase it, whereas they
Correct.
wanted more certainty, hence the exchange with delayed completion. And then from your perspective, you needed the time to get the permitted development rights activated, let's put it that way, in order to go through with your development. And then you structured the deal so that you could actually go in and start doing the works between exchange and completion. So walk me through the negotiations with that, and also B, why did you structure it that way?
Yeah, so we felt that gap, that window of opportunity gave us the chance to obviously not only get the permissions, but then start works. The vendor was clear from sort of day one what their plans were, and that's why when I said I'd like to sit down and find out what it is they're looking to achieve. They said, we're planning to stay in the area, or even look to stay local rather than relocate. Maybe that opportunity for having that key undertaking to do works might not have been sort of viable, but they said straight away they were looking to move to London. That's what their plans was. Also finding out that they had no debt or no lending against the property. We were able to agree and structure a deal which give them a little bit more than if they were to sell it. I always like to give two options, so we did say we could buy it unconditionally, but it was lower than sort of the price that was agreed on an exchange delay completion, and they were keen to take that because it ticked their boxes for a bit more money. It's not too long for them to wait. They didn't need the money up front, with no lending, moving up to a house they'd already purchased up in North London. So that's what allowed us to actually structure it in that manner.
Okay, so you actually gave them two options. One is an unconditional deal, but it was for a little bit less money, and then the exchange delayed completion. So in return for waiting a little bit longer, I think it was 12 months, was it, that you agreed?
Yeah, 12 months, yeah.
12 months, yeah. And then if they waited for the bulk of their money for 12 months, then you would give them a bit more money. So it's almost like kind of like interest in a way, but as a purchase price. And remind me, what did you pay? Did you pay the full 10% on exchange, or was it less?
I think it was 5% from memory.
5%, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, yeah, because it was, I think it was 5% because they were happy with that. And so you've exchanged contracts, paid your 5%, and then you were allowed to go in. It was all part of the terms of the contract. You were allowed to go in and start your works, and you had 12 months to complete. Did everything go according to plan? Sounded like there were some complications.
No, it never does, Tarek, unfortunately. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the permissions, we got the permit development. So I'll just quickly run you through that. So we used Class M rights for the ground floor, which enable us to do 2 flats in the main building. And then we used Class G on the upper floors to get another 2 flats. So we had 4 flats there. We ended up actually doing the top floors a split level 2-bed rather than a studio and a 1-bed. So end up with 3 in the main block. In terms of overruns, we had some, let's just say, some friction from a lovely neighbour on the left-hand side who was, when they found out what was going on, they were putting in rejections and calls constantly to the council with just some of the design elements. So similar to the front of the building, you see the dormer windows there. We did a similar design on the back, but we actually, I think initial design was actually putting it together. So they They rejected it on that basis with the design. So it just put us back a bit with making these amendments from the design perspective to then get approvals. Because we had some design elements that we changed. We also added an extension on the rear of the rear one bed ground floor flat. So that just opened it up a little bit more. Even the case officer who came out said, basically, sorry for wasting your time. There's no issue with this, but they just wanted to come out just to appease sort of the neighbour. So yeah, we definitely had some delays on the sort of build side of things. And I was actually running 2 other projects at the same time as this, so 12 flats in Camberley. So it's just sort of managing the build teams who then came off this, were focusing on that, and it's very hard to motivate a construction team to then come back on the side when you say, look, it's ready to go now, when they can see the sort of finish line on the other project and wanted to carry that on. So it was it was all fun and games in the end, but we got there in the end with those delays that we managed to get overcome.
Yeah, and something we should also mention is that when you exchange contracts, usually you pay your stamp duty at the moment within 14 days of completion. That's the norm. But here you had to pay it sooner. You had to pay it within 14 days in this case from exchange of contracts, because the stamp duty land tax manual at HM Revenue and Customs says that you have to, the deadline is 14 days from when you substantially perform on the contract. And usually substantial performance is completion, but sometimes it can be exchange of contracts, because that's when you've paid your deposit and you took possession of the property. And when you took possession, it kind of triggered substantial performance. And so you actually had to pay the stamp duty within 14 days of exchange rather than on completion. There's just something to bear in mind. So obviously you got to factor that into your funding costs and what have you. And then I think you funded all of the conversion costs out of cash, in effect, from cash reserves, obviously, because you can't raise finance because you've not completed on the property just yet. And then towards the end, when you were about to finish the works, which was very close to the 12 months deadline, I remember we had to try and negotiate an extension of that 12 months. Was that just remind me, was that primarily due to the works, or it was also due to the refinance arrangements?
Yeah, so it was a combination of both. Obviously, we were overrun with the works because of the issues we faced from the design element, and then we also had sort of the funder in place who, at that time, again, what we had as an initial deadline set, we went over that as well. So, like you said, we had to look to renegotiate with sort of the vendor's solicitor just to make them aware of what's going on, and that we're working as quickly as we can because we're keen to get this done as well. But yeah, like you said, it did overrun and cause some delays on both sides.
Okay, and so the works were all completed. This is kind of how it was finished, finished to a very, very high standard. What did you do with the flats after you converted them? Did you keep them? Did you sell them on?
Yeah, so ended up keeping them just to sort of add to the portfolio. Obviously, it's an area that I know very well. It rents really well. I think we sort of decided to set it up as I think we did it from memory. The first tenants just did it an open sort of weekend, so with viewings. Really had really good feedback with, like you said, the sort of finish and the sizes of the apartments, and it allowed us to rent them out. I think one of the properties there's still chap in there from like the first sort of occupier. So
oh wow, okay.
It's been there for a while, and yeah, they, like I said, they rent really well, and they're well received. So yeah, we end up keeping.
And what's the profile of the tenants? Are they are they professionals? Are they students? Or?
Yeah, so in all 3 of these, they're professionals. We've got working professionals in all the apartments in the block.
now that you've you've done it once before, at least, would you do it again, or is it one of those where, like, never again type scenarios?
Yeah, there's always aspects. I mean, generalization as a deal, I'll definitely do the deal again. There's always aspects that you do differently with it. So there's, it's definitely, I'd probably look at, I probably think in hindsight, I'd probably try and push a little bit harder to negotiate for an option if I could.
Right.
Maybe I could have tried, but I think they were set on wanting that security of having an exchange. And I think, especially when I remember when we got to the legals as well, their solicitor was, let's say she was a tough cookie to crumble. I mean, you did a good job managing her expectations. So I think, whilst I'd be keen to do an option on something like this, I'd definitely give it a go. And then, probably aspects of the design, just trying to sort of see if we could tick those boxes off a little bit quicker, maybe just having a better channel of communication with all the professional team, just to make sure we're all on the same page and all working towards the same goal, just to avoid any unnecessary delays, which did face on this project.
What you say about that, the choice of maybe going with an option agreement instead. I think the downside with that is that you wouldn't have been able to go in and start the works earlier, designs and all that finalized, and then trigger the option, exchange contracts, complete whatever period that is after fairly short, wouldn't be 12 months. And then start your works. So you would have had to pay your full purchase price at the point of completion. So, swings and roundabouts, there is a downside to going down that road. Maybe something that you could have potentially done as a bit of a hybrid. And I usually suggest this for even clients who are looking to, for example, acquire a property that's potentially going to become a HMO, is do a combination of the two. So you have an option agreement, and then you do your due diligence and get your PD and all of that sort of stuff. And then once you've got all of that sorted, then going to exchange of contract and then complete, 1 or 2 weeks later. And the reason why I recommend that is because you're already investing some money into the professional team, into planning applications, and so you don't want to buy it because you're taking too long or whatever. And that option kind of secures you that you've got effectively a lockout period for X number of weeks that they can't sell to anybody else. During those few weeks, you could at any point trigger the option and secure the deal. So, that's something that I, could have been potentially an option here. So you could have had an option agreement, got your PDs and what have you sorted out, and then still have the exchange delayed completion, so to enable you to do the works in between the exchange date when you exchange and the date when you complete it. Maybe you still have the whole 12 months, but it's just that, maybe 10 months of that is between exchange and completion, and then a couple of months is between option and exchange. So a bit of a hybrid approach there. Would you consider maybe thinking, doing it that way on future deals?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've run sort of a few deals past yourself, so I appreciate that's your expertise, and you're very good at being creative and thinking outside the box of what might work best. But yeah, I think on the face of it, that definitely looks like an option worth considering on something like this, to do a hybrid type model.
Finally, any other tips you want to share with the audience, if they're thinking about this type of approach?
Yeah, I'd say if you manage to get yourself in a position with a deal like this, sort of direct to vendor, and where you are literally speaking to a site owner or a landowner, just always consider what their circumstances are and really try and delve deep into what it is they're trying to achieve. Looking at the deal itself, we can all do that behind a computer screen or have an idea on numbers, but I think where sort of the best deals are done is where you've really considered what their circumstance and what they're trying to achieve is, which would create that sort of win-win, as they call it, solution for all parties. So I'd say that's definitely something worth taking on board.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jay. I'm going to link through to your contact details and your website in the description below. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Tarek. Thank you.